Fadaneli is an esthetician and is not licensed or certified to dispense or administer prescription drugs or devices. The charge of importing merchandise contrary to law provides for a sentence of up to 20 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a fine of $250,000. This is MedSpa Mayhem, the podcast all about the chaotic world of medical aesthetics. From Botox to lasers to IV bars, learn how to tell real versus fake, legal versus illegal, and safe versus potentially deadly. Hear the crazy stories inside the med spa world and find out what questions to ask and how to spot the people cutting corners. I'm your host, Dr. Kate D. Together, we explore the wild west of medicine that is the aesthetics industry. Hi, this is Dr. Kate D, and I am going to talk today about an arrest that happened about a month ago in Massachusetts. This was in the news November 1st, and I wanted to talk about what happened, what this woman was doing, how she got caught, and what lessons we can learn from what happened to her and what happened to her med spa and her patients. So the headline I first saw was Massachusetts spa owner accused of performing thousands of illegal injections of counterfeit Botox and fillers. So the summary of this case, Rebecca Fadaneli, she was 38 years old. She owned a medical spa called Skin Beaute Med Spa, and it was beauty spelled Beaute. That's kind of cute. And she was accused of importing counterfeit Botox, Sculptra, and Juvederm from China and Brazil since March of 2021, according to the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Massachusetts. So Fadaneli is an esthetician, not a nurse, allegedly received over $900,000 in payments for the counterfeit drug injections. She had 2 locations in Randolph and southeastern Massachusetts. So what happened? Okay, so one of her clients reported her to the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration. That sparked an investigation. It turned out that the Customs and Border Protection Agency, CBP, okay, they were already deep in an investigation of her. So, according to an affidavit from a special agent with the FDA, Fadaneli was smuggling in counterfeit Botox and fillers from China and Brazil. This was between November 2023 and March 2024. Customs and Border Protection seized at least 6 parcels from China addressed to Fadaneli or her employees. The packages included various counterfeit injectable jugs, including products labeled as Botox and fillers like Sculptra and Juvederm, although, as we've discussed, Sculptra is not a filler, but people think of it like a filler. So it's an injectable that you inject into people. So when CBP began seizing packages addressed to her spa, she started diverting them to her home. And then when CBP caught on to that, she switched the address delivery to another one of her businesses and eventually to another acquaintance's. So she knew they were onto her and she continued doing it anyway. And she just tried to keep changing the address. Okay. Then she also tried smuggling counterfeit drugs from Brazil. When she made a return trip from Brazil one time, Customs and Border Protection inspected her belongings at Boston's Logan Airport. And they found a variety of counterfeit drugs, including counterfeit weight loss drugs labeled as Ozempic and vials labeled as lidocaine, which is an anesthetic, and also more dermal fillers. So despite all that, and they confiscated all that when she came back from Brazil, she still managed to get some counterfeit Botox and fillers into her spa, which she personally carried into the business in a silver suitcase and a lunchbox, according to prosecutors. And then she allegedly sold them to patients, advertising on her website that she was an esthetician with a degree in anatomy and trained to provide advanced cosmetic procedures. Okay. And when she was caught, she initially denied that she ever said she was a nurse, although she did tell patients that she was a nurse. And she also denied that she did injections, although she did personally perform injections on patients. She later admitted that she bought injectable drugs from a Chinese supplier through Alibaba, but she didn't supposedly know if they were FDA approved. So in the investigation, they looked at her personal communications and they found a bunch of patient complaints. So first of all, one patient reported that she told her she was a nurse and literally said she was from Harvard, but Harvard was spelled wrong. But she got a degree from Harvard, but it was spelled Havard. Okay. The document said one client complained about droopy eyes, another complained about having little balls develop in her lips, and another client sent her a message complaining that she had a hard lump under her eye and that her eyes appeared sunken as a result of the procedure. Now, I will say that all those complaints are kind of typical complaints about injectables. It's one of the reasons why you really want to go to somebody who knows what they're doing, because all those things are kind of known complications that can happen. So, as far as I know, she didn't send anyone to the hospital with her fake products. So, for years, and this is a quote from the U.S. attorney. So, for years, Ms. Fadaneli allegedly put unsuspecting patients at risk by representing herself to be a nurse and then administering thousands of illegal counterfeit injections. The type of deception alleged here is illegal, reckless, and potentially life-threatening. Now, as we've seen on the podcast before, we've had a couple of examples of people getting injected with fake product and getting very sick and going to the hospital, including with botulism and one young woman who developed a very serious life-threatening infection from fake product offered off of Alibaba. And for anyone who didn't hear that episode, Alibaba is a kind of like the Chinese equivalent of Amazon. You can pretty much order anything off of Alibaba. So she was finally arrested, and it's really interesting to me to see what she was charged with. So she was charged with illegally importing merchandise contrary to law, selling or dispensing a counterfeit drug, and selling or dispensing a counterfeit device. And just so you understand at home, technically Botox is considered a medical device, not a drug. The fillers are also considered medical devices rather than a drug. They're just kind of like implants. So she was actually charged with selling or dispensing a counterfeit device. According to the charging documents, since March of 2021, Fadaneli, owner of Skin Beaute Medical Spa with locations in Randolph and Southeastern Massachusetts, had been importing counterfeit Botox, Sculptra, and Juvederm from China and Brazil and performing thousands of injections of counterfeit drugs and devices for which she received over $900,000 in client payments. It is alleged that Fadaneli consistently represented to clients and employees that she's a nurse. In fact, Fadaneli is an esthetician and is not licensed or certified to dispense or administer prescription drugs or devices. The charge of importing merchandise contrary to law provides for a sentence of up to 20 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a fine of $250,000. The charges of knowingly selling or dispensing a counterfeit drug or counterfeit device each provide for a sentence of up to 10 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a fine of $250,000. Interestingly, though, she, as far as I can tell from the reporting on this case, has not been charged with the most egregious thing, which is practicing medicine without a license. Practicing medicine without a license is a felony in every state. I have been trying to figure out why that charge is not being brought against more people doing this kind of practice. So she's clearly not a doctor. Even if she were a nurse is not allowed to practice medicine. They can practice under a doctor and carry out doctor's orders, but they can't practice medicine on their own. So even if she were a nurse and practicing medicine on her own, that's practicing medicine without a license. Well, how is it that these people aren't being charged with that? And it really is very confusing to me. I believe that it is kind of splitting hairs, because if she never said she was a doctor, then is she really practicing medicine without a license? Well, in my opinion, which of course doesn't matter, and I'm not a lawyer or a politician, but in my opinion, if you're actually doing all the practice of medicine, providing medical treatments, providing medical advice, or prescribing drugs or devices, then that's the practice of medicine. That's what doctors do. I mean, that's literally what we do. So if you're doing that without a medical license, then you're practicing medicine without a license. This is not being enforced anywhere in the country. As far as I can tell, I don't know of a single case where any of these people who is practicing medicine without a license actually is getting charged with that. But anyway, so as far as I know, this is where it rests at the moment. I am sure she's not still in jail. There is ongoing reporting. So if for any reason you are listening and you're potentially a victim of this Fadaneli Skin Beauty Medical Spa in Massachusetts, in the show notes, we will have the link to report your experience to the FDA. The FDA is actively collecting complaints at this time. And we'll also have a link to the U.S. Attorney's Office website that has ongoing information about the status of this case. You know, I think the important thing to keep in mind is that getting this kind of treatment is very dangerous. So going to a place that is using fake product purchased in other countries or off the internet, you just don't know what's in that vial. So we've seen examples of fake product that was completely not what the label said. So I did one podcast episode we talked about fake Ozempic, and that in that case, the vial was labeled Ozempic, but it had insulin in it, and this person almost died from hypoglycemia from injecting insulin. We've seen cases of fake Botox send people to the hospital with botulism. We've seen a case of someone who had a fake Kybella and got a life-threatening infection from that. So if you go to one of these places that's not legally purchasing product, it's super dangerous to your health. Okay. So how can you tell that a spa is illegal? Okay. It's hard right now. There's no organization that is certifying med spas. And I am working on that, by the way. So I will have more on that in upcoming episodes, but I am working on forming a med spa board that will hopefully provide certification for med spa, so you know whether something is legit or not. But meanwhile, here's the questions that I always ask. This is the first thing I do. I look at their website and I see what providers they have. And you can look up, usually there is, an indication of, is this a nurse? Is this a doctor? And you go and you look up their license and see if it's active and if it's valid in that state, or if they even have a license. So in this case, Fadaneli did not have any nursing license at all. So you could look her up and say, wow, she's definitely not a nurse in Massachusetts, right? But then the second thing is you have to find out who the medical director is of the spa. So every medical practice will have a doctor in charge. They have to have a medical director. In most states, that's going to be a doctor. There are some states where it could be a nurse practitioner, and that, again, we've talked about, and I can get into when a nurse practitioner is allowed to be the medical director and when it's not. But let's just say for now, there should be a doctor in charge, and you have to look up that person's license and make sure they are actually licensed in the state where you're going. And then the tricky thing is ask to have an appointment with the medical director. Okay. So if the medical director is a real medical director, they will be, guess what? Medically directing. So they will actually be at the spa directing those nurses or whoever else is in the spa. Sometimes there's estheticians, sometimes there's PAs, nurse practitioners. So if that medical director is active in the spa directing things, then they will have some office hours. They should be reachable. They should be bookable for an appointment. And ask if, hey, can I get an appointment with the medical director? I really want to have a consult with them and see if they're available. I've done this with a few medical spas and they say, oh, we're sorry. He doesn't see patients here. Well, where does he see patients? Oh, well, he works at the hospital. Well, what kind of doctor is he? Well, is he an anesthesiologist and he's never been at the medical spa ever? Like, there are many medical spas where the medical director has nothing to do with the place, and the place is using their license in order to practice medicine illegally. And this is going on all over the country. This is very common practice. When I first started in medical aesthetics 10 years ago, as far as I understood at the time, the going rate for that to rent somebody's medical license back then was around $2,000 a month. Guess what it is now? Closer to $500 a month is standard. And so people call that mailbox money, right? So someone is illegally using your license to practice medicine, you're not there, and you get a check once a month. Okay. So for that person, as unethical as that might sound, there are plenty of people who are happy to take the mailbox money. As a matter of fact, I know people in various states around the country where there are some doctors and nurse practitioners who are literally a medical director for 30 or more spas. And they collect in this mailbox money and they never do any work for that. So you could make a business doing that. And I've seen people respond to queries. I'm on some Facebook forums where people are looking for a medical director. Hey, looking for a medical director in, a town in Iowa. Well, I've seen people respond to that query, hey, I cover all 50 states, send me a message, right? Now, can you cover all 50 states if you're actually being a real medical director? There's no way, of course. I mean, I have one place, that's where I am. I'm not there every day, but I'm there. My office where I'm recording this podcast is 5 minutes away from my spa. I don't even feel comfortable covering a second spa, at least not at the moment. I just don't have it in me. I'm too busy doing this podcast and taking care of patients in my own spa. But I'm just saying, there are all these places that have these, what I would just call them as fake medical directors, right? They're off there, they're gathering their mailbox money. So not only look them up, but ask to have an appointment with them. See if they ever go there. Okay. And then the last thing is make sure that when you go to your brand new med spa, you've never been there before, make sure your initial exam is with somebody who can do an actual exam and prescribe a treatment. So in that case, in every state, that would be at least physician's assistant or nurse practitioner, or of course, a doctor. And doctors can have either an MD, which is what I am, or a doctor of osteopathy or DO. So there are medical schools that are DO schools. They are doctor of osteopathy medical schools, and their education is very, very similar to an MD. And for all intents and purposes, are considered the same as an MD. So if you go to a new medical spa for the very first time and you see either a registered nurse or an esthetician or someone with no license at all, and they do anything to you that's medical, that is just not legal. Okay. So you have to see a doctor first, or again, a PA or a nurse practitioner can do your good faith exam. Okay. And then an RN or an esthetician can carry out a medical procedure if that's legal in that state that has been prescribed by someone else, but they cannot prescribe a treatment to you. And unfortunately, a lot of med spas are operating that way, where the lowest level possible person, and I say lowest, I mean, it's the level of education, but also it's the cheapest person they can hire to perform that service. They're letting them make medical decisions. That's just not legal. So one of the things that I do when I'm looking at a med spa to try to figure this out, okay, I'll give you an example of a spa that I looked at recently. This spa was in Arizona, and it listed the owner as a laser technician. And it had a staff page that listed all their staff, which was great. Some places don't even do that. But this listed their staff, and they had laser techs, they had estheticians, and they had RNs, but there was no one with any degree higher than an RN on their website. No medical director, no nurse practitioner, no PAs. And so to me, that is a giant red flag. So as we know, you have to have at least a PA or an NP or a doctor do your good faith exam, meaning the initial assessment and treatment plan. And those people should be listed on the website, okay? And the next thing you do is look up everybody's licensure. So those are easy to do in any state. You can look up the nurse's license, the doctor's license, and see that they actually exist. And of course, they should always list the medical director on the website. If there's no medical director on there, they either don't have one or they have an absentee one that's not bookable, right? So you want to go ahead and ask who the medical director is and book an appointment with them, or at least ask about that. That'll at least get an answer to that question. Are they ever there? Okay. The FDA has an ongoing investigation. And if you have personally had an interaction with this med spa in Massachusetts, please report that to the FDA. You can also send me a message. I'd be very interested in hearing about it. And we will have links to all of that in the show notes. And if you've had any other experience that you'd like to talk to me about or to report or even talk about on the podcast, I'm totally open to that. Just send an email to info@drkated.com. And that email will also be in the show notes. Again, I hope this has been really helpful to figure out for yourself what questions to ask. And this example hopefully is a good example of what can go wrong. And honestly, I'm happy that as far as I know right now, there hasn't been anybody who has been disfigured or maimed or killed in this particular illegal med spa. But please keep in mind that those things are possible. I know it's not likely, but you really don't want that to happen to you. So thanks so much for listening to the podcast today. I will report follow-up on this case and all the other ones when they happen. And until next week, it's been great talking with you today. Thanks for listening. If you've learned something and like what we're doing, please tell your friends and give us a 5-star rating in your podcast app. If you have a question or a crazy story of your own you'd like to share, please send an email or voice recording to info@drkatede.com. That's DRKATEDEE.com. Or reach us through the website, MedSpaMayhem.com. And read the book. MedSpa Mayhem is available everywhere books are sold. Thanks for listening. This has been MedSpa Mayhem with Dr. Kate D. We are so grateful you're listening, and we hope you've learned at least one fun or possibly disturbing fact today. Don't forget to hit subscribe on your podcast app and leave us a 5-star review. And read the book. MedSpa Mayhem is available everywhere books are sold. Links and more can be found in the show notes and on medspamayhem.com.